we really appreciate you being here for this conversation as we work really hard to connect folks with services across Denver. I want to give you just a little overview of who's going to be speaking, and right now Mayor's going to kick us off here with some major proposals and the immediate impacts they're going to bring. Britta Fisher is going to talk about shelter and services that will enhance safety for residents and the partners that are helping us with that as well. Bob McDonald's going to talk about public safety, and Robin Kinich will also talk about some lasting solutions and how we're going to ensure that going forward in our city. And then Cole Chandler's joining us as well to talk about safe outdoor spaces and the importance of our partnerships. Just so you're aware of how to use this if you haven't done Teams before, after the presenters are finished sharing their remarks, there will be a Q&A, so everyone will get a chance to raise their hand. And if you go to that bar where you can mute yourself or unmute yourself, there's also a little hand raise feature there. Just raise your hand and we'll go through the chat and we'll acknowledge you. And as I do that, you can unmute yourself to ask your question yourself. That's kind of one of the main reasons that we wanted to utilize this format. And then just asking that everybody be respectful. If you have any technical problems, you're not hearing or you're not seeing anything, just exit and re-enter the event. You all received an invitation to do that. And we're going to record this as well so that we can make it available to you and post it on various platforms throughout the city. All right, so let's get started. I didn't put a fan in front of me. The air conditioner just kicked on. So Mayor Hancock, I'm going to go ahead and let you get us started.
Thank you, Teresa, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. To the members of City Council, thank you very much for your time and attention to this critical matter in the life of our city. I think we all agree that these are extraordinary times that require extraordinary measures. I know that we all know the fact that we're in the midst of a public health crisis, one that quite frankly is likely to be with us through the end of the year. COVID-19 has impacted every one of us, but it poses particular concerns for the most vulnerable, including people who are experiencing homelessness. Now, our health officials have monitored health and safety conditions, and the situation has deteriorated to a point that we must work and move to reduce the risk now. We have always focused on harm reduction strategies for all of our residents, and that is exactly what we will do in response to protecting those experiencing homelessness in our city. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began in March, Denver has taken significant steps to serve and support people experiencing homelessness. We've spent $24 million in emergency funds that have helped cover the cost to stand up 2 24-hour shelters, secure more than 700 hotel rooms, deliver more hand washing stations and publicly accessible toilets, and provide testing and screening for our neighbors experiencing homelessness. But we all acknowledge that we must and we need to do more. And as we've stood up these options and resources, we've also seen more vulnerable people coming to Denver that has led to increased number of unsanctioned campsites throughout the city of Denver. The number of encampments and the public health and safety risks to people living in these encampments and to the neighborhoods has reached a tipping point. We have closely followed CDC guidance during the COVID pandemic and have held back as encampments have grown and been set up around downtown and in neighborhoods. DDPHE has been closely monitoring the health and safety conditions at these encampments. They have seen disease outbreaks, and the situation again has deteriorated to a point that we must address the danger and reduce risk. That's why I'm supporting 2 proposals to provide even more and better services. First, we're going to partner with Colorado Village Collaborative, and you may recognize the name of this organization. This is the organization that has led the setup of Tiny Home Village experiment in Denver. It's a very pragmatic group of individuals, a solid collaborative partner to the city of Denver, and they presented a proposal to establish safe outdoor space, temporary managed campsites in the city of Denver. We've been having conversations for months now and how this could work with Colorado Village Collaborative and our public health officials from DDPHE. I've also had conversations with several mayors across the country who have taken the step to assess how it could work in the context of this pandemic. Some cities that, like Denver, who thought they would not ever set up a sanctioned campsite, have had to do so in response to the pandemic and has become a best practice across the country. I want to be clear, these are temporary. We still believe that getting people indoors and connected to services is the best way to ensure long-term stability for those experiencing homelessness in our city. These managed sites will allow people who are currently living in outdoor encampments in neighborhoods to relocate to safer, more suitable locations where services will be provided. This is an emergency step that is necessary because of the ongoing COVID pandemic. Now, the number of safe outdoor spaces and their locations have yet to be confirmed going forward, but we are working daily to get that set up. We do believe that it's important that we have strong outreach within the neighborhoods in which we may establish these. And so we are going to take the process appropriately to inform people where these may come or may be situated at the appropriate time. One of the goals of this approach is to safely close neighborhood encampments, though. I want to be clear that our goal is to create the opportunity to give people greater stability in a location where we can give them access to services. In the meantime, we're going to do several things. We're going to focus on guiding people living in our neighborhood encampments scattered throughout downtown to motel rooms, shelters, and these safe outdoor spaces once they're set up. 2, outreach, healthcare, and mental health workers will intensify and increase their visits to the encampments. Thirdly, the city will increase efforts to clean encampments with more frequent trash pickup and use needle collection. And again, ultimately, safely close these neighborhood encampments. Second, but equally important, I wanted to share with you that I plan to endorse the proposed sales tax initiative designed to raise $40 million a year dedicated to increasing housing services and shelter for people experiencing homelessness. This effort is being led by Councilwoman Robin Kanish, and again, thank you for your leadership, and the Coalition of Service Providers, and is planned for the November ballot. Supporting sanctioned campsites during the pandemic and endorsing proposed tax increase are not positions I take lightly. You all have known my position on these issues for quite some time. And these are issues that we have thought about, have debated for years. But as a community, overwhelmingly, we agreed last year during the debate over Initiative 300 that we can do better. And as we have seen the situation deteriorate, particularly with COVID-19, unequivocally, I believe we must do better. Supporting these proposals is a step in the right direction at this time. This is just one element of what will be increasing efforts to further support the population and to help them achieve greater stability. Now, I've come to this last step with some reluctance because I firmly believe the policy of the city should be to good people in housing and not in tents. And we are going to do our very best to replace these tents with rooms. But this virus has placed its own reality on our plans, and it must be met with different strategies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Britta Fisher. She is our Director of the Office of Housing and Stability, and she will talk about our ongoing efforts around this issue. Britta?
Thank you, sir. When we look at Denver, we want to see a healthy, housed, and connected Denver. That is the vision of our Department of Housing Stability. And health is the primary factor behind today's announcement of temporary managed campsites. We're introducing managed camping as a temporary measure warranted by the public health response due to COVID-19. We have made giant steps to ensure the health and safety of persons experiencing homelessness throughout the pandemic. I'd like to recap a couple of those things. The establishment of 24/7 sheltering and hundreds of hotel rooms. This was the right thing to do. Our partners and the city had to stand in a critical gap when COVID disrupted our sheltering system, and we quickly adapted and redeployed personnel and resources to meet that critical need. Hundreds of individuals have a bed that they can count on every night. People are getting quality meals through a business that continues to employ people. More than 180,000 plates have been served at the National Western Center and Coliseum auxiliary shelters. Our guests are reporting being better rested and less anxious. Some of the signs of stability that we had hoped for when we were instituting around-the-clock sheltering, with assigned beds, personal storage, and integrated services in healthcare. I want to thank the many homeless service providers, volunteers, and redeployed city employees for standing in that gap and to help our community. Denver is always in conversation with our partners and the community about how we can have a community response to this issue of people experiencing homelessness and seeking stable housing. That's what got us to today's announcement from the mayor of temporary managed campsites. I want to thank Cole and the Colorado Village Collaborative for your commitment to helping people throughout this pandemic. Denver is very fortunate to have several foundational programs that are in place that will help us with implementing the temporary managed campsites. This includes street outreach support for persons experiencing homelessness. We're very proud to fund and support the Denver Street Outreach Collaborative, which has a history of providing much needed outreach to unsheltered individuals. It's led by the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, together with St. Francis Center and Urban Peak, and their collaborative started long before COVID. However, with the growth of encampments and during this crisis, we have also helped 80 individuals and experiencing unsheltered homelessness with a hotel or motel room. We've done that many so far, and we want to do more to meet this growing need. And so we are increasing this outreach effort and growing it in some new ways in the coming days. And so we're targeting our neighborhood encampments and maximizing the utilization of those hotel rooms. Managed campsites will be temporary, but it can be also a means to a more stable housing outcome. It's not a permanent solution. And because individuals are best served when they are in an indoor environment, which is better for human health, where they can best connect to resources and to housing stability, that's the path that we are seeking with HOST, with the Department of Housing Stability, to transform our sheltering system from an overnight emergency response to around-the-clock sheltering with a person-centered approach, focusing on connecting people to permanent housing. And that is one of the reasons that the lead entity for the city on a temporary managed campsite will be the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. Our departments have been working very closely in coordination on this public health emergency response, and it's my pleasure to turn this over to their executive director, Bob McDonald.
Thank you, Britta. I want to thank everybody for being with us this morning. I'll keep my comments brief so that we can get to others that want to offer up their comments and have some time for Q&A. You know, I want to stress that every step of the way during this pandemic, it's been the charge of this department to protect everyone in our community, and most particular, our most vulnerable. And every step of the way, I believe we've done that. You know, we've very early on, even before the first case, even before we saw the first case of COVID-19 in Denver, this department has reached out to provide a number of services to persons experiencing homelessness, and even more particular, those who had not at that point taken advantage of the services that the city offers or that are offered by our shelter providers. By getting additional hand sinks out to communities and in park settings and down the 16th Street Mall, and even in shelter settings, by educating and providing kits to persons experiencing homelessness so that they could use hand sanitizer. They knew where the sheltering facilities were and where the hand sinks were, the additional hand sinks that we put out. So very early on, we reached out to protect our most vulnerable. And every step of the way, we've had to strike the right balance because it's important to keep in mind, and I've been asked this question many times, wouldn't it be safer to be outdoors than it would be to be indoors during a pandemic like this? And I want to stress something here, that all things being equal, In my role, I will never be in a position to say that it is safer to be outdoors than indoors in the absence of a pandemic. But we have to balance things now and take a look at the conditions of some of the encampments that we're seeing, balance that with the pandemic. And I think it's time, the time is right to take a look at some harm reduction strategies as a temporary measure to manage this pandemic. It's important to keep in mind also that while we are in this situation here where we have to manage COVID-19, this department has also had to manage outbreaks in encampment settings. We've been struggling with an outbreak of hepatitis A for many, many, many months now. We have had over 100 people who have contracted hepatitis A, in part because of the conditions that we see in encampments. And it's come to my attention in the last day or so that we might be seeing the early signs of another type of outbreak, a bacterial outbreak stemming from these types of situations. So it's not an easy decision to make. We have to balance the public health challenges and situations that we see stemming from unmanaged encampments and those that we see within pandemic. So I want to stress that this is a temporary harm reduction strategy. The ultimate goal here, not just from my colleague and host, Britta Fisher, but from a public health standpoint. We want everyone to get indoors. It's always safer. Even in a managed encampment site, you still run the risk of an outbreak, more so than you would see in an indoor setting. So this is a temporary measure that we're going to evaluate every step of the way as we manage the COVID-19 outbreak, and we're going to balance it with those public health situations that we see stemming from encampments or just being in an outdoor setting versus an indoor setting. So I want to thank everybody for joining with us this morning. I'm looking forward to partnering with our partners at CVC. And with that, I'll turn it over to Councilwoman Kinich for some further discussion here. Councilwoman.
Thank you so much to Bob and Britta and the mayor. I'm here today, Councilwoman Robin Kinich. I'm an at-large member of the council, and I'm here with our council president, Mr. Jolin Clark. And while we do not speak for every member of council on every detail of the initiatives we're discussing today, it's important to note that both of these initiatives grew out of very deep collaboration between the council, the mayor's office, and the community, and that there is strong support for both of the steps we're outlining today from the Denver City Council. So I'll talk more about my colleagues and the work that they've done to support this. Every member of our community deserves to live in a home, every single one. Creating that reality is going to require big structural change to overcome failed economic and housing systems, inadequate systems of safety nets like our healthcare coverage, and dismantling racial inequality. These are failures that originated beyond Denver's borders, and they are often going to take strategies of a scale that we in Denver alone could not tackle. We all have to redouble our commitments and our work to achieve the scale of change that will bring every person into a home. But while we do that long-term work, we have to reduce risk and harm faced by those who are at greatest risk. Today, especially for those who are not being served by shelters, whether that's because of a pet, because of a partner, or because of a trust gap, this virus has taught us time and time again a very humbling lesson as elected officials in particular. We have to govern swiftly with the tools that we have to protect public safety. We don't get to govern in the world we wish we had. We have to govern practically with the limited choices in front of us sometimes. Safe outdoor space is humane. It's a pragmatic way to protect public health, not just for those experiencing homelessness, but we have learned just how interconnected all of our health is. So protecting folks experiencing homelessness is protection for our entire community and helping to reduce risk. So I have been very humbled to be part of the support of the community-led initiative that's advancing today. I believe that Cole Chandler will talk about more of the folks that we need to thank, but I particularly want to call out my colleague, Councilwoman Seda Baca, who has been very active, and all of the council members who signed on in early support of this initiative to help it advance. I also want to note the public support. 8 out of 10 of those of you who were surveyed back in April, that was more than 600 of you who were surveyed, more than 8 out of 10 of you expressed that you were open and supportive of this alternative to help keep people safe, preventing spread of the coronavirus. So I think we are responding not just to the crisis in front of us, but to the community who has been communicating with us as a city today. And to our national conversation, I want to make clear how responsive this proposal is to racial inequality. We know from data from the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative and HUD that a majority of those who are unsheltered in our region are people of color. So by addressing and reducing risk, we are addressing racial inequality and how it shows up in homelessness, particularly for Black and Native American individuals. So the Safe Outdoor Space is designed for health and improving housing outcomes. And that also brings us to the sales tax proposal. This conversation began long before the coronavirus. It began with those asking, as the mayor mentioned, how will we do better? What will it take? And so I want to give a shout out to the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless and many other shelter providers and supportive housing providers who have been at the table saying, how is it that we raise resources to help create that reality that we want? The pandemic slowed us down a little bit in the planning, so we're here now trying to catch up a little bit on our timeline, but it underscored the need for this tax. It underscored the equity and health impacts of failing to act in a more assertive way. So let me just talk for a minute about the way that this tax has been conceived. As someone mentioned, we're talking about a proposed sales tax of 0.25%. We're talking about a sales tax that would have to be approved by the voters. It would be referred by council, and with the support of my colleagues, would be placed on the November ballot. It could generate up to 40 million, but that will definitely depend on our economy and may ebb and flow as our economy does. The goal here is to support three major things. The first is housing. Whether that's building new housing with services, whether that is rental assistance to get folks into existing housing, but let's build and get more folks into housing. Secondly, shelter. Transformation. We have learned through this epidemic, as Britta outlined, that 24-hour shelter is more successful for the people experiencing the shelter, and it's more successful for the community around it. No lines waiting to get in, no ways to have to store your stuff between one shelter and the other shelter, helping folks be able to stay inside all day long. Funding will help us both with the capital improvements needed to shelters to make that possible, as well as to the staffing to have housing outcomes. We can't just counsel people for housing if they're only there to sleep and eat. We need time with them to help them understand their housing options and apply for the programs that might help them. So housing and shelter, and believe me, we can bring those two together. We can create catalytic projects that use one piece of land to address both that first emergency step as well as the permanent solution on the same site. But then the third category that we hope to use these funds for is innovative approaches and interventions for those who fall between the cracks of housing and shelter. For folks who might need tiny homes, like the Colorado Beloved Village, that has created a quicker and very cost-effective way to get people into a more safe shelter. We have options that could help do direct intervention and housing counseling with folks on the street, like the Street Outreach Collaborative that Britta Fisher mentioned. We could scale that up. But the idea here is room for other innovations that can help to make an impact. Now, we know that many of the things that we are doing, particularly in the housing realm, are working. I fear that we may not be talking about this loudly enough and clearly enough with our community, but let me be clear. Supportive housing works. More than 85% of the folks that get housed directly from the street, not folks who've maybe gone through a program and gone through shelter, but a housing first approach directly from street to housing, more than 85% of them are successful, not just in year one staying in their housing, but through year two. For those who had arrests for things like trespassing or other issues, those arrests are cut more than in half. We see that this is better for the folks experiencing homelessness, and again, better outcomes for our entire community and our neighborhoods. So these are the types of models we have the opportunity to scale up. We've proved the 24-hour shelter concept during coronavirus, but we have a cliff coming. Federal FEMA dollars, federal dollars won't be here forever, and this sales tax is poised to step in where those resources end and make sure that we don't lose that shelter capacity as we go into 2021 and the years beyond. I want to be clear that we talk a lot about resources, we talk a lot about money, but the success that we need for people whose lives are at stake on the streets does not just depend on the passage of this sales tax or the city's approval of this safe outdoor space. It requires our entire community. It requires our neighborhoods and our communities to be inclusive, to learn about these models, to engage and get your questions answered, but to welcome this alternative to people living in streets or parks, but instead to have them in either a safe camp or in the other alternatives, whether it be shelter or supportive housing. My office has created a guide that can help neighborhoods learn more about supportive housing, but we need our neighborhoods, we need our community to be inclusive and to support these neighbors as we expand these pathways. It will take all of us. And we also need to fight despair. When I talk with folks who are living on the streets, they talk about not having enough to eat and the elements. They talk about their fear of policing, but they talk about despair, the feeling that it can't get better, that they don't matter. Their despair is what all of these measures are meant to counter. But we as a community can't despair. We can't think that this is too big or too hard. We have to stay at the table and fight despair as well. And your votes in November on a sales tax measure, your support to learn about these models and welcome them in our communities, you all can be our partners in fighting that despair. With that, I'd like to pass it off to Cole Chandler, who's one of our community partners helping to make this reality. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Kinich and Mayor and Britta and Bob. And I also want to pass along a thanks to Councilwoman Seda Baca, who's been a champion for this alongside of us over the last several months as well. So as I listen to the remarks that precede my own today, I'm hearing a sense of underlying values that I want to highlight for us as we conclude these remarks. And I believe it's important to do so because these are values that so many of us share across this city. And so the first value I hear expressed is a value for health. We all want to be healthy and whole, and we want the same for our entire community. You can hear that clearly. We all also share a value for stability. We all want a safe, stable place to base our lives from, to come and go from, to share with family and those that we love, to leave our things and be safe and stable. And the third value that we hear across all of these threads and these comments is a value for equity. We want resources to be accessible across our community, regardless of race, class, gender, sexuality, and so forth. And so I'm joining this call today because I believe that our Safe Outdoor Spaces proposal advances each of these shared Denver values. Through this proposal, we aim to first and foremost prevent the spread of COVID-19 amongst our unhoused neighbors. Secondly, we aim that in doing so, to provide those neighbors with a safe, stable environment, that stability that we all need. And by doing so, we also aim to extend equitable access to trash, bathrooms, hand washing, case management, health screenings, testing, mental and physical health care, hotels, and as Councilwoman Kinich has suggested, long-term housing. So I'm grateful to be here today, and I'm grateful to have the chance to represent the Colorado Village Collaborative and our many partner organizations who have worked tirelessly over the last several months to advance this effort. I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to implement this model here in Denver, but even as we do so, I want to acknowledge that this was not our idea. This is a model that people on the streets have dreamed of and requested. And so today I celebrate with our unhoused neighbors who can claim, as Councilwoman Kinich has suggested, hope over despair and claim their stake in the shared health, stability, and equity that we all long for. Thank you.
Cole, thanks so much. And I would suggest too, and I put in the chat for all of the journalists who've joined us for this, a link to a video that Britta Fisher helped me produce to give you a true sense of her person-centered approach, the way that this administration is managing homelessness for individuals rather than forcing individuals into a system. And I think it's a pretty powerful testament to the work that's been going pre-COVID and continues. Hopefully you all found the feature where you can raise your hand. And if you have a question, this is the time to do that. So do we have any questions for anybody?
Hey, Teresa, before we go to question
Go ahead,
and
Mayor.
answer, let me just add, we received word during the remarks that, we've had some tremendous success with regards to the Pepsi Center and the number of people coming through to be tested. In the last couple of days, we've had, as many as 2,000 people come through on a day to be tested. We ran out of tests, and it was severely threatening the ability to keep the Pepsi Center operating to test people. We want to thank the governor and his team. I got word while the remarks were being given that the state, through the governor's leadership, is donating 10,000 tests that can be used for residents of the metro area there at the Pepsi Center. And what's going to do is allow us to keep the Pepsi Center testing site open today and tomorrow until 4:30. We'll still be closed Friday and through the weekend, but we'll reopen again on Tuesday for testing. And so we got to give our employees a break there. But today and tomorrow we'll be open until 4:30. Thanks to the governor and his team for donating 10,000 tests. And then we'll resume testing on Tuesday. I just want to make sure everyone had that, and please share that information with us through your journalistic tools.
Share with the viewers, the readers, the listeners, everybody.
Whatever.
Thanks, thank you. I see Donna's hand first. So Donna Bryson, go ahead and unmute, friend, and go ahead and ask, and we'll get to Connor after you.
Okay, I have a couple questions for a couple people. First, for Cole, for the first site, when and where you expect that to be, and when you expect to open it up? And for Bob McDonald, have you seen COVID outbreaks in the camps? And can you tell us any more about this bacterial outbreak? And for the mayor, I just want to be sure I heard you correctly. Did you say that people in the camps are coming from outside Denver? Because I've certainly seen people in the camps from in Denver.
Donna, I'm not sure we can hear you. We heard that last part. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, the first one was to Cole, if he could explain when and where the first camp might be set up. And then for Bob McDonald, are you hearing me now? Any details on whether COVID outbreaks have been seen in the camps, and any details on the bacterial outbreak you mentioned?
Thanks, Donna. I'll take your first question. We're still in the due diligence process to determine the possibility for the first location for this. We have every intention of moving as quickly as possible. As you know, we have begun hiring staff for this site, and we're staffed up and ready to implement it as quickly as we can. But we're still, scouring sites and determining what makes the most sense at this time.
And Donna, Bob McDonald here. If I understand, if I heard your question correctly, you had asked if we have seen any COVID cases in an outdoor setting, I think in encampments. And then the second question, I believe, was, second part of that is, can I elaborate a little bit on what we're seeing with potentially another outbreak? I want to just go back a step and just remind everyone that while there's some fantastic and tremendous work going on at the Pepsi Center, we have very early on have done testing in encampments, and we have a wellness Winnie, our public health mobile unit, that will go to underserved communities and do that testing where they are. We've been doing that for quite some time now. So I just want to remind everyone to take advantage of those services as well. We're going to continue to do testing in the shelter settings and encampment settings and continue to provide that mobile service. I don't have the data in front of me here in terms of what cases we've seen in outdoor settings and indoor settings. I can tell you that we've seen positive results in both settings. I could share that with you. Regarding the potential outbreak that we're seeing, there's early signs of an outbreak of a bacterial infection known as Shigella. Shigella is a bacteria that causes shigellosis. It can be a pretty serious bacterial infection, and it stems many times from the conditions that we're seeing in some of the encampments. Now, the best way to avoid any type of an outbreak in persons experiencing homelessness is to get people indoors. And that's why this temporary safe outdoor site is a harm reduction strategy. But the best way to avoid that, any type of an outbreak, is to get people indoors. We're going to do everything we can, as we have with the hepatitis A outbreak and COVID-19, and now with a slight uptick in shigellosis cases in an outdoor setting, to manage it as quickly as possible.
Donna, I couldn't hear your question to me. Try it again.
Is that better? I thought I heard you say that the people we're seeing in the encampments are from outside Denver. And I'm definitely seeing people in these encampments from Denver, people who've lost housing since the COVID.
I really cannot hear you, but I think you're talking about people who have come into Denver and are helping to make up the encampments. My statement there?
Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, we have done somewhat of a limited survey of folks that we are serving through our congregate care sites, and there was about a third of the residents, or at least our visitors, were from outside of Metro Denver, or outside of the city of Denver, but from the metro region. Bretta can give you more on that, but we do know that in some of our neighboring cities, some of the shelters have closed because they were principally driven by volunteers, and principally older adults would be the volunteers to those sites. So logically, during the onset of the pandemic, they have pretty much shut down, and we have seen more people migrate into the city of Denver as a result.
Donna, thanks, and go ahead and take your hand raised down, and then we'll grab Connor from Westward. I think you're next, Connor. Go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
We gotcha.
Great. Yeah, I was just curious. I know you said you don't know the specific number of sites that there are going to be, but I was wondering if you can give us a ballpark. It sounds like it's going to be in the plural. It sounds like it's going to be more than one. And then also, I'm curious to know how much the city is contributing in terms of resources and money to these sites, and is there a possibility that city-owned land could be used?
So one of the challenges I gave the group was to look at potentially setting up multiple sites, because what we've learned in looking at cities across the country, and the proposal actually spoke to this, that you're only looking at 45 to 50 people per site. That is the sweet spot to maintain good order and to also to basically do an efficient job in serving our neighbors experiencing homelessness in these sites. And so if you do that, how can you look at potentially multiple sites? In order to do that, what the city was asked for in the proposal, and what we could potentially offer up as the use of city-owned land if we have. And so absolutely our engagement in this would look at the leverage of city-owned land to establish some of these sites. And Cole can speak to this, but the CVC has done a great job in raising some external dollars for this effort going forward as part of the proposal. And then we are beginning the conversation internally on what other resources the city can bring to bear to help these sites going forward. So that's where they stand today. We don't know, is it going to be 2 or 3 sites, but the reality is that we recognize we may have to set up more than one to efficiently help with our neighborhood encampments.
And I wanted to remind everybody, we do have a couple people on the phone. So if you do have a question and you're calling in, if you do *6, that should unmute you to ask a question over the phone. So do we have anybody on the phone that would like to ask a question? Okay. Do you have any other questions for the group? I don't see any other hands unless I'm missing it. Anybody else?
Hey, I'm trying to raise my hand, but it's not working. Can I ask the question, Katie?
Of course.
9 days. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what are the next steps? Does council have to vote on where these sites go and how many there are, or is this a decision straight from the mayor's office? What happens next?
I think I can address that, Catherine. So it depends on the site. Some sites have zoning that requires a permit from a department. Some sites that might be publicly owned would require a lease, and council does have a vote on any lease. If there are contracts, they don't go to council unless they're over $500,000. So we may not see a council contract for any dollars that exchange hands. But if the dollars have to be moved from one fund to another, that might require a council vote. So a little bit of it depends on what the site is. Some sites could be approved simply by departmental staff. And other sites might require a council vote if they are public. And then it also depends on whether the city makes a contribution of cash and how much and which fund it's from. So we're a little bit early on knowing the details of, which of those things might require council support. I have done my best to try to keep my colleagues in the loop on the model, and those council members who are, the host for particular sites will certainly be in those conversations in terms of the community outreach and in terms of how to answer questions communities may have. But they will all get a chance when each of these things, if they do come to us, whether they do or don't vote, that's when they would have the chance to make those decisions on where they themselves would vote on this.
And a timeline? Any kind of timeline for when these would be set up?
Cole, you want to take a shot?
Yeah, as I mentioned to Donna's question, really it's as quickly as possible for us. We are staffed up for site number 1. To Connor's question, we're fully funded for site number 1, and I want to issue a thanks to our funding partners on that, the Colorado Health Foundation, the Denver Foundation, Rose, and the Buck Family Foundation have all come up to fully fund our operation for startup and operations for the first site. And now, we're looking to get that up as soon as we can and then continue rolling out additional sites as funding and sites allow.
We would be remiss if we didn't let folks know that there is a GoFundMe campaign as well for community members who'd like to directly participate in supporting that. So Cole can get you that information after the press conference if you'd like to share that.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kinich. That's definitely shared on the Colorado Village Collaborative Facebook page. And if you send me an email, it'll bounce back with an automatic reply and a link to that campaign. So please reach out about that.
Teresa, I think you're on mute.
Teresa, you're on mute.
I'm on mute and I'm telling Deanna to unmute. Deanna, thank you. Deanna, are you ready with your question?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. Mayor Hancock, you mentioned these designated outdoor areas will be managed. What plans are in place for this to happen? And then I've got just a few more questions. You also mentioned the city will be cleaning up needles. So will illegal drug use be allowed? And do you think this will entice more people experiencing homelessness to go? Finally, you mentioned speaking with other mayors. Did you have an opportunity to speak with Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles? As much as there are numerous programs assigned to helping the Skid Row population and other designated areas, it's been proven hard to manage. So how will Denver's plan differ? Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to come right back to the LA model because I think that's an important one. And Mayor Garcetti was on the chain communication that I had with other mayors. And the mayors that, I'll come back to that in just a moment. What was the first part of your question?
Yes, you mentioned the city will be actually, the designated outdoor areas will be managed. What are the plans in place for this to happen? And then with that, you mentioned the city will be cleaning up needles. So will illegal drug use be allowed? And what are your thoughts on that enticing more people experiencing homelessness that use these illegal drugs? Actually,
I appreciate it. So I think Cole is best to answer that. But let me tell you that the city will not be managing these sites. The Colorado Village Collaborative and their stakeholder partners will be managing these sites. From the proposal that they sent before us, illegal drug use will not be permitted within the sites themselves, which is important. And again, I'll turn it over to Cole because I think the rest of the questioning or further expounding on those points are really his place.
Thank you, Mayor. So the proposal includes a 24-hour staffing model. This site will be staffed by program staff 24 hours a day. And I think one of the things that should be emphasized here is really this is a regulated, managed encampment. And there will not be guests that are permitted. It will only be a space for residents of the site. And so we will do a significant intake process that will include intaking people into the homeless management information system, It will include a resident use agreement that includes agreeing to the basic rules and regulations and guidelines of the campsite, and the site will be managed by staff at all times. And so, you know, that's the plan for that, and we feel confident in that model, basing it upon best practice in other places and upon our own experience in the tiny home village.
And that goes straight, thank you, Cole, very, very insightful, because that goes straight to the heart of the question about LA, which makes this much different than what you see in Skid Row, which is a more of it's not as coordinated or as managed as this site will be. And as you know, it's over multiple blocks. It was not handled well, or, you know, really established by a legal effort that occurred back several years ago. And this has been something that Mayor Garcetti and LA have been trying to, quite frankly, disentangle over the years. Not only Mayor Garcetti, but his predecessor, Villaraigosa, will tell you the same thing. So they have worked really hard to disentangle this. This is what we're trying to avoid in Denver. These encampments along the streets don't have much control mechanisms to them. And once they become embedded, they're very, very difficult to break up. And so I have spoken with mayors around the country, including Mayor Durkin in Seattle, Mayor Breed in San Francisco, Mayor Wheeler in Portland, Mayor Liccardo in San Jose, Mayor Johnson in Dallas, Mayor Bottoms in Atlanta, Georgia, and other mayors have weighed in, Mayor Adler in Austin. And this model that Cole and the CVC and a couple of council members have proposed is really the best practice in terms of having it managed, monitored with some strong guardrails. It is set up in a temporary manner, and you do it as a result of something extraordinary that's been increased or introduced to your community, of course, the pandemic. And cities like Portland that had a very a bad experience with such sanctioned encampments not very long ago had to come back to this model, but with a different perspective. And so it has been a great lesson to talk to these mayors and to hear what they've experienced and some things that worked and didn't work with regards to these sanctioned encampments, or excuse me, sanctioned campsites.
If I might just add, it would be misleading to compare this to LA in any way, shape, or form. In fact, here in Colorado, places like Durango had a pre-existing safe outdoor space. Cole, you'll have to remind me of the mountain community that established a COVID-specific response for safe outdoor space. We spent a lot of time on the phone. Like in Denver, the proposal in Portland originated with a partnership between a council member and the community. And so we spent a lot of time looking at that model, which is 3 sites, 45 tents each. That might include some couples. So the people might be a little larger, but the tents are limited at 45 each. So those are the comparisons, and those are the models that would be appropriate. And if you need more details on those, we'd be happy to provide them off after the press conference.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And as I said, LA is what you want to try to steer away from and do, and that's what the other cities provide great lesson.
Thank you.
I have one more question, Katie with 9 News. Mayor, you mentioned that the goal is to safely close these neighborhood encampments. If people don't want to go to the managed campsite, will there be more of an effort to move them?
We have been enforcing, even during the pandemic, the urban camping ban in Denver. We'll continue to do so. And the goal, by providing alternatives, is that we will be able to step up our enforcement. And as Cole and I talk, one of the things I said, Cole, is that we've got to create a safer, more humane and sanitized location for individuals to congregate in our neighborhoods, because it creates a challenging situation for not only our neighbors experiencing homelessness, but neighbors who are around the encampment. And so this allows us to step up even more our enforcement of these sites. So we plan to do that. And that's what our rolling in incrementally to begin the process of cleaning up the trash, the needles, and to inform and do direct target outreach to individuals with case management to begin to relocate them in a better, more stable conditions.
Connor, your hand is still up. Did you?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. Yeah, a follow-up question. Oh yeah, and Councilwoman Kinich, I think you were referring to Aspen. That's the mountain community that has a safe camping site. But yeah, so my question is the Lincoln Park encampment and the encampments in 5 Points. When should we expect those to possibly be cleared out?
Jansen. Soon. We're going to target the encampment around Maury Middle School. The next encampment we'll continue on with the Lincoln Veteran Park, encampment, and of course the ballpark. But the reality is that we're going to intensify our outreach and engagement of all of these sites going forward, and because we have to, and it's an unsafe situation for everyone.
I want to just observe that this conversation we're having is a good representation of the diverse perspectives that exist in the community. And this proposal is one where folks who have a diversity of perspectives on enforcement have been able to come together. And so I think that when we think about whether or not folks who disagree on political strategies or enforcement strategies, this is an example where folks set aside those differences to say we can all agree on a safe alternative. And so you may hear a diversity of perspectives from council members or from community about the other efforts, but I do think that we can and have found a bridge to work together on something we can all agree on, which is safe places with bathrooms and services and housing referrals. So I think that that's an important observation about this moment in a divided debate.
Okay, I see who just popped on. Is that Max?
Yes, Max.
All right. Hey, Max. How are you?
How are you? I'm
Go
well,
ahead.
thanks. My question is, how do you guys plan to, quote unquote, share the wealth and move some of these camps to more affluent sections of Denver?
Wherever we decide to, Max, locate a sanctioned site, will include community engagement. And that's one reason why all the sites have not been nailed down, because it is important that we let the community raise their awareness in terms of that a site near them is being considered, and we have conversation. But at the end of the day, every one of these, all of our neighborhoods have to be under consideration where we have city-owned land or private lands being opened up, but we got to make sure we have the right guardrails as well as the right zoning for them.
Anybody else have a question who hasn't already asked? I know a couple of hands are still up. Donna, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, just wanted to clarify whether communities will have veto power. You said there'll be community engagement.
We'll have veto power?
Communities be able to say no to a camp?
None of the land use in Denver, whether you're building a grocery store or a housing building, none of the land use in Denver is based on someone next door deciding who gets to live next door to them. We left a lot of that history behind us in terms of racial exclusion, religious exclusion. So we don't give one person permission to keep someone else out. We have a land use system with zoning rules that helps to guide which kinds of things go where. That is part of this discussion. Community engagement is critical regardless of the land use that a city is considering. And again, I mentioned the guide on supportive housing engagement that we've created. While that's particular to permanent housing, many of the types of conversations we encourage communities to have are outlined in that guide. And I think that can be a sense. So for example, we can say it might be helpful to think about what the site looks like. Neighbors should often have input on design, setbacks, where is parking going to occur, all of the things that might impact neighbors directly. What we say typically is you don't get to say whether your neighbor gets evicted for one thing or another, or what the rules are inside a place. That's private. Your neighbors kind of make some of their own decisions on how they live their lives. And as long as those are safe and they protect the larger neighborhood and they comply with all of our code provisions. So I just want to be clear, no city in America has land use decisions by majority rules. It's always a conversation about engaging, giving input where that input is most appropriate. And I always say it's most appropriate at the place you're connecting to the neighbors. If there's physical interaction, physical space, design, those are areas. And I think the beloved community village is having that conversation, for example, right now around their tiny home village, right? But once you get inside, what services are being provided? We want to answer every question. We want to be transparent about that. but neighbors don't get to decide what kind of, treatment someone is offered or what kind of housing they're offered. That's done by best practices that are based in research. So I will just say that this land use decision, in my opinion, is no different than any other, is that it's critical to have input, but that no land use decision in this city of Denver or elsewhere submits a vote of the people, whether who gets to live next door. That's just not a part of our history we can repeat again.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
We've only got like a minute left, and I want to give Mayor Hancock just the last word to wrap us up. Mayor, go ahead.
Thanks, Teresa. We were going to go there. I want to thank Councilwoman Kanish for that answer. Listen, we recognize this is not a decision that everyone across the city is going to raise their hand and say this is a 100% unanimous decision and right decision to be made. In fact, as I was in preparation for this decision-making contemplation, as I normally do, I reach out to a lot of people and have conversation, and the response was a diversity in responses. But what people settled on was what is in the best interest of those who are experiencing homelessness today, and ultimately the community as a whole. And while we anticipate that there will be folks who will not agree, and you got to know that these conversation debates have been going on for years in the city of Denver. They are across the nation. They're no different in Austin, no different in San Francisco, Portland, San Jose, where these have been, sanctioned sites have been set up, than they will be here in Denver, Colorado. And simply put, to align exactly what Councilwoman Kanish just said, what does the law say and what aligns with your values? These are tough calls, but is it in the right direction for the people who are experiencing homelessness and our neighborhoods, that we set up sites to allow folks to receive the type of connectivity to services that ultimately, hopefully, moves them to greater stability. And that's why we've made this decision. But for COVID making its introduction to our community, with the number of people coming in, we may have been trying to work on other solutions or continue with our strategy, but the reality is today is that COVID has introduced a whole new reality to us, and we have to make some extraordinary decisions to meet this extraordinary challenge. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and Cole, to you and Colorado Village Collaborative, thank you for your continued partnership. To the members of City Council for the work that you continue to do every day to stand in the gap of our most vulnerable, and to continue to remind all of us to remember that this is a very diverse city, and that as we make decisions, we got to keep the goal and objective of equity in front of us. And so we appreciate it. Thank you to the entire team for being a part of this effort, and continue to work on how we find solutions for our most vulnerable. Thank you to the media for chiming in as well. We'll be available to continue to talk to you and answer some of your questions as we go along. Thanks, Teresa.
All right, thanks everybody, and thanks for being here. I know everybody on the call is happy to answer questions afterwards, and I can facilitate interviews as well. So thanks so much, everybody.